Welcome back to World History. Today, we're learning about Chapter 8. Let's get into it. All right, so Chapter 8 is the ancient Greeks. By the way, if you were in class last week, there's a little bit of an overlap. We don't quite have it all the way ironed out where each chapter is a week, so you might have seen some of this. That just means you should know it already, okay? Treat this like a review. So we're going to talk about the Minoans and the Mycenaeans. We'll talk about city-states. Hopefully you know what that term is already. And we'll talk about democracy. That's important. So our culture, especially our politics, is a blend of ancient Athens and ancient Rome. And we're going to talk about that. What's a democracy? What's a republic? What is America? Sound good? Let's get learning. Okay. We'll talk about the physical geography. It's back, and we'll see what these people, how does the physical geography influence the Greeks? What happened to the island of Thera? It blows up. And then we'll talk about democracy versus a republic or a representative democracy. All right, the geography for today, the Aegean Sea, the Mediterranean Sea, the Black Sea. As far as countries go, you need to know Greece and an island called Crete. All right, so let's go to a map. There is the country of Greece. Okay, it's located right there on the edge of the Mediterranean, which you should know, but if you don't, you get to learn it again, okay? So no problem. Right here, this seahorse looking thing, that's the Mediterranean. Sound good? Where's Greece? That country there, perfect. And the island on the south side right there, that's the island of Crete, okay? The Black Sea is up here, and the Aegean Sea is right there. Okay, so it's at the end there, the top end of the seahorse. Very good? All right. The Minoan civilization is the oldest civilization, and they're going to be from around this area, and they're going to be on the island of Crete. Don't get them confused with the Mycenaeans, which are the first Greeks, because they spoke Greek. But the Mycenaeans come after the Minoans. Sound good? Okay, so there's the island, there's the Minoans, Mycenaeans, very good. If you were in class, I would show you this PDF, and it talks about the refugees, and a lot of them are going to Greece from Syria, and they come across that sea between Turkey and Greece that's called the Aegean Sea. Okay, does that make sense? That's why we're learning about the Aegean Sea as opposed to some other place, because I want you to know this area is very important today with regards to refugees. Okay, it's back. All right, physical geography, human geography. Take a look at this place. If you live here, what are you going to be good at? What do you think? Okay, you're going to be good at building boats. And then what are you going to do with those boats? You're going to go fishing, and then what else are you going to do? You're going to want to visit other islands. When you visit, you're going to say, hey man, you got some of that, I got this, and let's trade. And it's going to facilitate trade. So you can, what I want you to do is not memorize what I taught you or just told you. I want you to look at this map and go, you know, those look like people that would need to build boats. They probably know how to fish. I could see them moving around and trading stuff. Like, I want you to be able to figure it out that the human geography follows the physical geography. All right, and there's some of the boats, or at least pictures of it. Are you more likely to have one empire or smaller city-states? Okay, smaller city-states. It's harder to have a unified empire when they're just islands and there's mountains and stuff like that. The geography gets in the way. So they have a city-states, and a city-state is like a city that's your own country, and they'll develop differently. And two of the most famous ones are Athens, birthplace of democracy, and Sparta, which is known for its war and the saying, this is Sparta. All right, to be continued. You've got boats, let's trade, obvious. And what are you going to trade? Of course, your octopus vase. Listen, I don't particularly care if you know about the octopus vase, but it was on a college exam of mine, and I noticed it's in your quiz as well. So for whatever reason, the history books want you to know the Minoans liked their octopus vases. So this is an example right here. This is an artifact from which culture? The Minoans, all right. The island up there, it's 234 in your book. You can read about it, and it's gonna blow up. It's the second largest volcanic eruption in world history, and we think this is what ended the Minoan civilization. All right, because if you were any of those islands around it, you would have been blown away. Here's a quick video about Santorini, or formerly known the island of there.
"3,500 years ago, a thriving civilization existed on the Aegean island of Santorini. Here, long before the Greeks flourished, the Minoan community of Akrotiri prospered in a culture that rivaled the splendors of those who lived on the nearby island of Crete. Artists painted frescoes of sunlit landscapes. Others depicted the ordinary tasks and pleasures of daily life.
Now, here is where you found the frescoes.
Yes, we found frescoes and other things which show that we are discovering here a very highly civilized society of the Bronze Age.
That civilization vanished, much the same way ancient Pompeii fell when Mount Vesuvius erupted in 79 AD. But the Santorini volcano puts Vesuvius to shame. According to scientists, its eruption around 1630 BC is the second largest in human history. Akrotiri was completely buried, and some scientists suggest the eruption triggered the decline of the Minoans. To learn more about the volcanoes around Santorini, National Geographic Explorer-in-Residence Bob Ballard and his colleagues, including National Geographic grantee Hallredur Sigurdsson, came here in 2006.
What we were trying to do was to better understand this volcano because, thousands of people are living on Santorini. The population continues to increase. And so our goal was to go underwater with our advanced technology and try to see how large its last major eruption was.
The volcano is now mostly underwater. So Ballard brought his famous rovers, Hercules and Argus, to the Aegean to give the team a close-up look. And what they found was both exciting and disturbing.
When you're investigating a volcano like Santorini, think of it as a layer cake. There's multiple eruptions that have taken place through time. And so what you're trying to do is to get a measure of the thickness of each layer of the cake by using our vehicle systems to actually measure the thickness of the layers from the eruptions and then how large an area they cover so we can get a volume calculation. And that's what showed us that it was much bigger than we thought.
In fact, the team estimates that the volcano may have shot 14 cubic miles of magma out of its crater. An eruption that size would have caused massive tsunamis and blackened the skies over an estimated 115,000 miles. More exciting still was their survey of the Colombo volcano, right next to Santorini. It erupted more recently in 1650 AD. Down here, the team found literally hundreds of hydrothermal vents and the carpet of life.
There's a whole nother system going on. It's called chemosynthesis. And at the basis of it is a bacterium that has figured out over eons of time how to duplicate the process of photosynthesis in the dark, living not off the energy of the sun, but living off the energy of the earth itself. It's a fascinating system.
For better or worse, this volcano system is still alive and well, with temperatures reaching up to 435 degrees Fahrenheit.
Santorini is so fascinating because it has a very violent history and more than likely will have a violent future.
It's a future that we can better predict, thanks to Dr. Ballard and his colleagues.
I also threw in a video about Mount St. Helens. If you like volcanic eruptions, here's this one.
At 8:32 a.m. on May 18th, 1980, they get there outside, turning the sky dark. Breathing becomes almost impossible. Destructive volcanic eruption in U.S. history. The eruption ultimately claimed 57 lives.
So who are the first Greeks? The Mycenaeans. All right, very good. And the Mycenaeans, right here you get I guess it's a faceplate. It's supposed to be King Agamemnon. And they are believed to be the ones that fought in the Trojan War. And if you're not familiar with that, that's where you got the fake horse, and they bring it in the city, and the army comes out of the city, okay? So we'll get to that in a minute, by the way. Here is the Mycenaean, one of their citadels. That's what it looks like today. Trojan War real, or was it fake? Or was it real fake? Or was it both, or neither? Listen, it probably was a real war. But if you know the story, we know it from the Iliad, you know, there's Poseidon's on one team, and Achilles, and there's gods, and there's it becomes mythical, okay? That's not true, or probably not true, but the history of the war probably is true. And so you start to get a mix of actual events and story when we talk about the Trojan War. Here's some quick videos about the Trojan War.
The Trojan War. You probably heard about this episode in history due to the well-known movie Troy. It's not known for sure if this episode happened as it was presented, but in Greek mythology the Trojan War was waged against the city of Troy by Achaeans, Greeks. Homer, an ancient Greek, chose to write about this event, which has been narrated through many works of Greek literature, but most notably Homer's Iliad. In this story is about war. Paris of Troy took Helen from her husband Menelaus, king of Sparta, and because of this, war is happening. The subject war is one of the most important events in Greek mythology. Episodes from the war provided material for Greek tragedy and other works of Greek and Roman poets. In our present times, or even the last centuries, many historians didn't believe that the Trojan War was more than a mythological story due to the fact that it wasn't so clear where the ruins of the city of Troy are, and probably another reason is that in this epic Greek poem, Greek gods are involved, and it sounds like a pretty fantasy. Let me give you an example. In this story saying that the Greek side was supported by Athena, Hera, Hermes, Poseidon, and other Greek gods, and the Trojan side was supported by Aphrodite, Apollo, Ares, Artemis, Leto, or Scamander. And maybe another reason for not taking the story as a real one is because that it seems Homer was a blind storyteller, and it is generally accepted that the poems were composed at some point around late 8th or 7th century BC, which are 4 to 5 centuries somewhere after the Battle of Troy. The subject is debatable, but most likely did take place in some form, so let's present it. The war may have taken place in 12th century BC. As I said earlier, all started after the abduction of the Queen Helen, wife of Menelaus, king of Sparta, by the Trojan prince Paris. According to Homer, Menelaus and his ally Odysseus traveled to Troy, where they unsuccessfully sought to recover Helen by diplomatic ways. Menelaus had a brother, Agamemnon, king of Mycenae, and convinced him to lead an expedition to retrieve her. The abduction of Queen Helen will lead to war. The Greek forces were led by King Agamemnon. In this coalition were involved more territories and city-states. The exact numbers of these battles is unknown, but Homer states an army of tens of thousands. Agamemnon was joined by the Greek heroes Achilles, Nestor, Odysseus, and Ajax, and with a fleet of more than 1,000 ships they crossed the Aegean Sea to Asia Minor to lay siege of Troy. The Trojan army was defending the great city of Troy. They were led by their king Priam, and had assistance from a long list of allies. The Trojan had their heroes too. The most important one is Hector, son of Priam. The majority of the war was in fact a siege, and the city was able to resist the invaders for so long. The city had tall, very fortified walls. In Greek mythology, the walls of Troy were said to have been built by Poseidon and Apollo. Achilles had a conflict with King Agamemnon, and he chose to not let his Myrmidon army to battle against Trojans. In this story, Patroclus, a very close person to Achilles, is killed by Hector after wearing Achilles' armor. The rage that follows became the prime motivation for Achilles to return to the battlefield. Achilles killed Hector, then he himself met his death. He was killed by an arrow to his only weak spot, his ankle, shot by Paris. The conflict lasted for more than 10 years. Because Troy wasn't conquered due to the Trojan defenses, the Greeks thought to destroy it from interior. Odysseus came with the idea of a wooden horse to get a body of man inside the walls of Troy. The Greeks all sailed off into the sunset, leaving a mysterious gigantic wooden horse, which in reality concealed a group of warriors within. After much debate, the Trojans pulled the gift into the city. When the night came, the horse opened up and a group of Greek warriors climbed out and opened the city gates for the army that was coming again. The Greeks entered the city and killed the sleeping population, creating a massacre. The Greeks then burned the city. The king Priam was killed, son of Hector was thrown down from the walls of Troy, and Helen was taken back. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe.
When Homer's Iliad was first written down in the 8th century BCE, the story of the Trojan War was already an old one. From existing oral tradition, audiences knew the tales of the long siege, the epic duels outside the city walls, and the cunning trick that finally won the war. In the end, the magnificent city was burned to the ground, never to rise again. But had it ever existed? By the time the field of archaeology began to take shape in the 19th century, many were skeptical, considering the epic to be pure fiction, a founding myth imagining a bygone heroic era. But some scholars believed that behind the superhuman feats and divine miracles, there must have been a grain of historical truth, a war that was really fought and a place where it happened. Frank Calvert was one such believer. He spent his youth traveling and learning about ancient civilizations before accompanying his brother Frederick on a diplomatic mission to the northwest Anatolian region of Çanakkale. It was here that Homer described the Greek encampment at the mouth of the Scamander River. And it was here that fate brought Frank into contact with a journalist and geologist named Charles McLaren. Locals and travelers had long speculated that Troy might have stood on one of the surrounding hilltops. But McLaren had been one of the first to publish a detailed topographical study of the area. He believed he had found the site, a 32-meter mound known by the name Hisarlik, derived from the Turkish word for fortress. Soon after meeting with him in 1847, the Calverts bought 2,000 acres of farmland that included part of the hill. Before they could explore any further, the Crimean War broke out and forestalled their archaeological ambitions for several years. After the war's end, Frank Calvert began to survey the site, but lacked the funds for a full excavation. This was where the wealthy German businessman and amateur archaeologist Heinrich Schliemann came in. At Calvert's invitation, Schliemann visited the grounds in 1868 and decided to excavate. Eager to find the ancient city, Schliemann tore massive trenches all the way to the base of the hill. There, he uncovered a hoard of precious artifacts, jewelry, and metalwork, including 2 diadems and a copper shield. Schliemann took full credit for the discovery, announcing that he had found Troy and the treasure of its king Priam. But the real treasure was elsewhere. When later archaeologists studied the site, they realized that the mound consisted of no less than 9 cities, each built atop the ruins of the last. The layer Schliemann had uncovered dated back to the Bronze Age, more than 1,000 years too early for Homer. But inside the mound was indeed evidence for a city that had thrived during the Mycenaean Age, with charred stone, broken arrowheads, and damaged human skeletons suggesting a violent end. It was Troy 7, contained in the middle layers and now ravaged for a second time by Schliemann's careless excavation. The settlement, spanning some 200,000 square meters and home to as many as 10,000 people, thrived until around 1180 BCE. Its position at the southern entrance of the Dardanelles Strait would have made a formidable strategic location for both defense and trade. Most importantly, there are the remains of a massive fortification wall, perhaps the very same one from which Priam and Hector once watched the Greeks approach. Of course, it's difficult to be certain that these ruins are the true remains of ancient Troy, and scholars still dispute whether the Trojan War as described by Homer ever happened. Yet the evidence is strong enough that UNESCO has labeled Hisarlik the archaeological site of Troy, regardless of its identity. Thanks to persistence, a bit of faith, and a lot of research, archaeologists are bringing the long-buried secrets of an ancient lost city to light. Are you enchanted by the search for lost cities? So are we, and that's why we love Fallen Glory, the lives and deaths of history's greatest buildings. Thanks to our partners at Picador, for a limited time you can get a copy of your own at a steep discount by clicking here, or visit ed.ted.com/books to learn more.
All right, welcome back. Here's some vocab for you. A fortress on a hill is called an acropolis. This is the type of stuff you just write down. You can't even pause the video. You write down acropolis, boom, equals fortress, done. Okay, and here's the picture of one. An agora, that's a marketplace. There's another vocab word. The bigger fish is people meet, they're shopping and they're at this marketplace and they're talking politics. And over time, they're like, hey man, we need to do something different. And over time, we're gonna get to democracy, okay? Oh, this is important, I need to mention. They identify themselves as part of their city, they wouldn't have said, I'm Greek, they'd have said, I'm Athenian, okay? You wouldn't say, does that make sense? You say that it's the city, that's your real country. It's kind of different, right, than what we have now? Let's talk about democracy versus a republic. Big difference, big deal. Write this down. Know this. Okay, this is more than just getting A or B on a test. This is you growing up to become a good citizen. So, with a democracy or direct democracy, you vote on the law. Should the speed limit go up 10 miles an hour? Yes or no? And you vote on it. So we just had a ballot in here. If you voted for Proposition 2, you got more houses. If you said no against Proposition 2, you got less houses, okay? Boom, you vote on the law. That's direct democracy. We do that sometimes, but most of the time, we vote for people. That's a representative democracy. You vote for Jack or Jill to be president, and you hope, or senator or whatever, and you hope that these people represent you in the way that you want to be represented. Does that make sense? That's a republic where you vote for representatives, okay? A representative democracy as opposed to a direct democracy. Okay, what was monotheism? Belief in one God. So what's a monarchy? One God, one ruler, okay? Monarchy, one ruler. Oligarchy, group of rulers. Democracy, ruled by the many or ruled by the majority. Sound good? Okay. Remember, oligarchy, I don't know, classes in the past have called it Olive Garden-y. It's up to you, as long as you remember it. You should know what an oligarchy is. Ruled by a group. So the history of the Athenian government, they have a king first, and if you have a king, you're ruled, what's that called? Ruled by one. Monarchy, all right. And if you're ruled by a group of aristocrats, what's that called? Oligarchy, okay.
Excellent.
And then we're gonna be a democracy in a moment. Ooh, new vocabulary word, draconian. What does draconian mean? Laws that are excessively harsh or strict. So loitering could be punishable by death. Crazy, right? I want you to know the word draconian. You'll hear this in modern times. But who have we learned about, or where did we learn about some really harsh laws from the past? Okay, in China, it was called legalism. Remember Shi Huangdi and his legalism? Burning the books and burning the scholars? He buried the scholars, but you know what I'm saying? Okay. And the reason I want you to know draconian is both for the vocabulary, but also to see most cultures, they'll try to do something extreme. They'll try to just crunch down and have these crazy laws and just, we're going to have law and order and just make the laws incredibly harsh. And it usually doesn't work. Here's a video about democracy.
Hey, congratulations! You've just won the lottery. Only the prize isn't cash or a luxury cruise. It's a position in your country's national legislature. And you aren't the only lucky winner. All of your fellow lawmakers were chosen in the same way. This might strike you as a strange way to run a government, let alone a democracy. Elections are the epitome of democracy, right? Well, the ancient Athenians, who coined the word, had another view. In fact, elections only played a small role in Athenian democracy, with most offices filled by random lottery from a pool of citizen volunteers. Unlike the representative democracies common today, where voters elect leaders to make laws and decisions on their behalf, 5th century BC Athens was a direct democracy that encouraged wide participation through the principle of ha boulamenos, or anyone who wishes. This meant that any of its approximately 30,000 eligible citizens could attend the ecclesia, a general assembly meeting several times a month. In principle, any of the 6,000 or so who showed up at each session had the right to address their fellow citizens, propose a law, or bring a public lawsuit. Of course, a crowd of 6,000 people trying to speak at the same time would not have made for effective government. So the Athenian system also relied on a 500-member governing council called the boule to set the agenda and evaluate proposals, in addition to hundreds of jurors and magistrates to handle legal matters. Rather than being elected or appointed, the people in these positions were chosen by lot. This process of randomized selection is known as sortition. The only positions filled by elections were those recognized as requiring expertise, such as generals. But these were considered aristocratic, meaning rule by the best, as opposed to democracies, rule by the many. How did this system come to be? Well, democracy arose in Athens after long periods of social and political tension, marked by conflict among nobles. Powers once restricted to elites, such as speaking in the assembly and having their votes counted, were expanded to ordinary citizens, and the ability of ordinary citizens to perform these tasks adequately became a central feature of the democratic ideology of Athens. Rather than a privilege, civic participation was the duty of all citizens, with sortition and strict term limits preventing governing classes or political parties from forming. By 21st century standards, Athenian rule by the many excluded an awful lot of people. Women, slaves, and foreigners were denied full citizenship. And when we filter out those too young to serve, the pool of eligible Athenians drops to only 10 to 20% of the overall population. Some ancient philosophers, including Plato, disparaged this form of democracy as being anarchic and run by fools. But today, the word has such positive associations that vastly different regimes claim to embody it. At the same time, some share Plato's skepticism about the wisdom of crowds. Many modern democracies reconcile this conflict by having citizens elect those they consider qualified to legislate on their behalf. But this poses its own problems, including the influence of wealth and the emergence of professional politicians with different interests than their constituents. Could reviving election by lottery lead to more effective government through a more diverse and representative group of legislators? Or does modern political office, like Athenian military command, require specialized knowledge and skills? You probably shouldn't hold your breath to win a spot in your country's government. But depending on where you live, you may still be selected to participate in a jury, a citizens' assembly, or a deliberative poll, all examples of how the democratic principle behind sortition still survives today.
All right, welcome back. Now we're going to talk about Greek mythology and Aesop's fables, okay? And then we're also going to talk about Iliad and Odyssey. So what's the point of mythology for the Greeks? It explains the world around them. Today we would say science explains the world around us. They had mythology. What's a fable? It's a short story on how to live. And then what's an epic? An ancient book or an ancient poem. And you should know some of these epics. We've learned them before. What's an epic from Mesopotamia? Gilgamesh. The epic from India? Ramayana. And now we're going to have Iliad and Odyssey. So what causes lightning? Well, you might have said it's some type of electrical charge. And according to the Greeks, you'd be wrong. Because according to the ancient Greeks, Zeus causes lightning. Now, we know through science that Zeus doesn't cause lightning. But this is their, and by the way, this is what I'm trying to say. The ancient Greeks, they're responsible for science, but they start off with mythology and then they move to science. And a lot of the science is based on their thinking. But at first, they're just trying to explain the world and they explain it with mythology. Later they go, I don't know if it was Poseidon. Maybe it's, maybe it was that earthquake or maybe it was a moon. And they try to figure out what's changing the water. So they're moving from mythology towards science. Okay, here's a couple of the gods. You can read about them in your book on page 242. But Poseidon, god of the sea. Athena, goddess of wisdom. Apollo, god of the sun. Ares, god of war. So a fable. This will be attached. I want you to read a couple of these fables. You might have even read them before, okay? Aesop's fables are pretty famous, and this is the time period that they come from, and I want you to read some of Aesop's fables. Okay, now we're learning about the Iliad and Odyssey. Remember the Trojan War? That's from the Iliad, okay? And so it's an epic poem, which is a long narrative poem. In it, one of the most famous characters is Achilles. He's dipped into the river, but they don't dip him all the way. His foot is his vulnerability, and he gets shot through the arrow. That's his Achilles heel. You've heard that term. And today we call your tendon an Achilles tendon. This all comes back to these ancient Greeks, and it comes back to the Iliad and Odyssey. Interesting, right? Homer's epic. So that's it for today. Make sure you take the quiz next class period and have a great day.